The whisper behind the curtain. Before you sleep, I want to tell you something strange. Not about blood or murder. It's about the feeling that someone is missing you, somewhere waiting for you to come back, even though you swear you've never been there. I don't tell stories to scare you. I tell them to make you remember. And once you remember, you can't forget. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. It starts with a curtain. Not the dramatic kind, just an ordinary plastic shower curtain in a mid-level apartment building in Seoul. But here's the thing. One woman swears it moved. She lives alone. No pets, no boyfriend, no drama. Just one night, she walked into the bathroom and saw the curtain swaying like someone had just stepped out. She didn't call the police. She called her sister, whispered, "Don't laugh, but I think someone was in my place." By the time her sister arrived, there was nothing to see. Just a clean bathroom, dry tiles, and a sense that something had happened, or was about to. That's how these stories start. Not with a scream, but with something you try to explain away. And across town, someone was stepping out of a stranger's shower. He left no fingerprints, no DNA, not even a footprint on the polished tile, because Yu Young-chul had done this before. At this point in 2003, Yu wasn't famous. He wasn't a headline or a Wikipedia page. He was just a man in his early 30s, with a crooked jaw from a childhood injury, a shuffling gait, and the sort of quiet you don't notice until it's far too late. He blended in. Repairman, delivery guy, neighbor. You wouldn't have remembered his face unless you'd seen it very, very close. And that's exactly how he liked it. He'd done time before, for theft, for fraud, for assault. But it was his stint in prison during the late 90s that really changed him. He read. A lot, especially about serial killers. The American ones, mostly. Bundy, Gacy, Dahmer. He wasn't afraid of them. He was studying them, annotating them like textbooks. He once told another inmate they were weak because they got caught. You didn't want to be famous. He wanted to be effective. So when he stepped out of that stranger's apartment after watching her brush her teeth, he didn't smile or shiver or feel guilt. He just made a note in his little black book. Bathroom has window, weak lock. But his first known victim, well, known to us, wasn't her. It was a high-end escort found dead in an upscale apartment near Gangnam. Strangled, body washed, no sign of a struggle. Police thought it was a client gone too far. There wasn't much investigation, just another sad case in a city where everyone's too busy to mourn a stranger. But something strange was noted in the file. Her shoes had been lined up perfectly at the door, like she'd never stepped inside. Yu watched the reports with interest, not because he was worried. He knew they weren't looking for him, but because it confirmed something. No one cared. At least, not about her. Not enough. That's when he decided to go further. Here's the strange fact of this part. Yu often claimed later that he didn't kill for pleasure. He said it was punishment, that the rich and the corrupt deserved it, that society needed cleansing. He viewed himself as a kind of moral executioner, with a hammer. But the truth is muddier, because at first he didn't target anyone rich, he just targeted those he could reach. Back in the apartment complex, more residents began whispering about small things. A toothbrush moved, the scent of cologne that wasn't theirs, a missing pair of slippers. No one called the police, because again, nothing had happened. Yu understood that well. He knew how to play with the line between paranoia and proof, between suspicion and certainty. And here's where things get interesting. South Korea had, until this point, never really faced a high-profile serial killer of this nature. Not like the ones from the West. Culturally, there was almost a denial that such evil could exist so close. Murderers existed, sure, but serial murder? That was fiction. Imported crime. Historians still debate whether this belief contributed to the slow reaction from authorities, whether the idea that this doesn't happen here blinded the police from connecting the dots early. The curtain kept moving. The bodies hadn't even begun to pile up yet, but the mechanism was in place. It wasn't the smell of death that warned anyone. It was the silence. And if you're still here with me, eyes getting heavier, remember this. The most terrifying monsters are the ones who wait. Patient, clean, and good at pretending to fix your TV. The first body. It was a Thursday morning when they found her. The apartment was on the 11th floor, quiet, upscale, with floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the Han River. Nothing looked broken. Nothing looked stolen. The concierge only checked in because the cleaning service said the door was locked from the inside, and her phone kept going straight to voicemail. She was 26. Beautiful. Professional. The kind of person people only describe in past tense with perfect adjectives. The detectives who showed up were used to death, but this one felt clinical. There was no blood, no bruises, just a faint red line around her neck and one long hair in her hand that wasn't hers. That and a single fingerprint on the edge of the sink, smudged and half lifted, never matched to anyone in the system. Here's what the report didn't say. Her eyes were open and her nails had been freshly trimmed. Whoever did this took their time and left with more than just her life. The autopsy confirmed strangulation, but noted something strange. Her body had been washed. No trace of semen, no signs of struggle. It was as if someone had bathed her, dried her, and placed her back on the bed like a doll. Some crime scene techs even debated if the scene had been staged, like someone wanted it to look clean. Now let's back up. To you. At this point, he was living in a tiny studio apartment not far from Hongdae. The kind of place you rent when you don't want to be noticed. He had no job, no consistent friends, just a collection of VHS tapes, newspaper clippings, and a growing urge he described as the throb in the back of the teeth. He had tried a few normal things, worked briefly as a repairman, got fired for being too quiet. He claimed he was building something bigger, something spiritual, that society was rotting and he was the solution. But the truth was simpler. He hated women, especially those he thought were corrupt, sexual, or superior. His rage wasn't righteous. It was personal. You later confessed that his first kill wasn't even planned. He'd gone to meet the woman under the guise of paying for sex. But once inside, something clicked. He said she looked through him, not at him. So he waited until she turned her back to light a candle, then struck. Quick, efficient. And then he cleaned, as if she were a room to be reset. Strange fact of this section, you used to wear gloves made of cheap cotton, the kind sold in bulk at convenience stores. He claimed latex left a smell. The murder didn't make major news. The papers gave it a few inches. Escort found dead in private residence, foul play suspected. No photos, no police sketch, no follow-up. To you, this was proof. Proof that no one cared. And that was the worst part. He was right. Police closed the file with a polite shrug. No sign of forced entry. No obvious motive. The client list had aliases and prepaid numbers. With no living family making noise, it faded from headlines in less than a week. But you kept the clippings. He started categorizing them. He had a folder marked Justice, another labeled Clean. The women he targeted all fit a certain type, independent, confident, comfortable in their skin. He hated that. And then 2 weeks later, another woman died. Same MO, strangled, washed, left, posed on her bed. Different neighborhood, same eerie calm. This time, the shoes were again neatly placed at the front door. Still, the police didn't connect the two. Here's where we talk about something that makes people uncomfortable. Victim hierarchy. That invisible ladder the media and authorities use when deciding who gets attention, who gets outrage, who gets nothing. Historians are still debating whether this cultural blind spot in early 2000s South Korea, especially toward sex workers, created the perfect environment for you to grow into what he became. He knew they wouldn't be priority cases. He even said so in his confession. I killed the ones no one would look for. But let's not pretend he was smart. He was cautious. There's a difference. At night, he walked the streets with gloves in his back pocket and a folded piece of newspaper inside his coat to wrap items he might need to throw away. He had what he called his cleansing kit: bleach wipes, a disposable poncho, and a plastic bag for souvenirs. Yes, souvenirs. Though he denied it later, police found several: earrings, a hair tie, even a chipped nail. He claimed they were evidence of corruption. The truth is, he kept them like tokens, reminders that he'd succeeded. But success made him sloppy. In the second case, a neighbor reported seeing a man leaving the building just after midnight. Nothing specific, just older than expected. No sketch was made, no canvassing done. That detail sat in a report until you was finally caught years later. That's how monsters move, not in shadows, but in the open. Casual, almost forgettable. And you was a master of that. He didn't drive a car, didn't own a smartphone. He used public phones and cash. He avoided CCTV like it owed him money. That wasn't brilliance, it was fear. The kind born from years in prison and a lifetime of being ignored. And maybe that's why this story keeps me up at night. Not because of the horror, but because he waited for the world to give him permission. And the world sort of did. The rain fell the night after his second kill, soft, slow, cleansing, just like he liked it. The man who fixed TVs. It's always the ones who offer help. That's what gets me. Not the weirdos in alleyways or the drunk guys shouting on the train. No, the real danger is the one who smiles just enough. The guy who nods when your grocery bag breaks or holds the elevator door a little too long. The one who says, "Need help with that?" Yu Young Chul became that guy. He stopped meeting women in hotels and started entering homes. It was a practical evolution. Hotels had security cameras, digital check-ins, too many witnesses. But homes could be silent. So he found a simple way in. He became the repairman. He bought a fake ID, then another and another. He printed out crude business cards with names like K-Tech Services or Neoline Audio Repair. Most people didn't even look at them. Just saw a man with a toolbox, nodded, and stepped aside. The first time he used the trick, he fixed nothing. He just scoped out the apartment, checked door latches, tested light switches, and then he left. But the second time, he didn't leave alone. The victim was a widow in her 60s, soft voice, lived alone with her cat. She'd called a real repair service, but you showed up first. Claimed there was a scheduling mix-up. She let him in because his shirt had a logo. That's all it took. She was found 3 days later by her niece. Blunt force trauma to the head. The cat was unharmed. And here's the strange part. Police thought it was a robbery gone wrong. The TV was broken. A drawer was left open. But nothing was missing. In fact, the drawer contents had been rearranged by color. That wasn't robbery. That was control. Later, in his confession, you described the feeling of walking into someone's home as religious. He said the silence made him feel higher than anyone else. He wasn't just taking lives, he was entering their space, their world. He liked that. By now, Yu's method had shifted. His weapon of choice was a hammer, easy to carry, quick. He'd often strike his victims while they were seated, sometimes while they were making tea. The moment their backs were turned, he called it the mercy angle. Police started to notice a pattern in the injuries, but they weren't ready to say it out loud. They had a serial killer. Not in Korea. Surely not. That was an American disease. But the numbers were rising. 2 elderly couples found within a week. No forced entry, no theft, just absolute destruction and a lingering smell of bleach. The bodies were always found in pairs. Husband slumped in a chair, wife on the floor, both with caved-in skulls. Phones unplugged, windows closed, doors locked from the inside. And here's something even stranger. In both cases, investigators noted that the TV had been turned to static. Not off, not muted, just snow. Yu said later that he liked the noise. Now, let's talk about Yu's childhood for a second, because every documentary wants to find the reason. Some terrible trauma, some switch flipped. Well, here's what we know. Yu grew up poor, very poor. His father was abusive and absent. His mother worked multiple jobs. He had a head injury around age 9, fell off a bike, and didn't go to the hospital. After that, people said he stared too long and had a weird laugh. He dropped out of high school, got arrested for theft before age 20, got married, got divorced, spent years drifting in and out of jail. But it wasn't until after his last prison sentence that something clicked. He stopped looking for approval and started looking for victims. Yu told one investigator, "I didn't want to die unknown, but I also didn't want to die normal." And while that sounds poetic, don't let it fool you. He wasn't deep. He was dangerous. There's a moment in the case that never made the news. After his 5th murder, Yu reportedly returned to the apartment the next day, entered using the same trick, different shirt, same toolbox. The police were still processing the scene. He stood outside for 2 minutes, then walked away when he saw the patrol car. Later, he described it as checking my art. Scholars still debate whether Yu's behavior mirrors Western-style serial killers or represents a uniquely Korean manifestation of rage and dislocation. One psychologist argued that Yu's methods were less about sexual desire or ritual and more about erasing his targets, making them vanish without noise, like a corrupted file. There's some truth to that. He didn't torture. He didn't monologue. He simply appeared, struck, and vanished. But he always cleaned. Bleach on surfaces, gloves on hands, plastic bags for tools. He even changed shoes between victims. And he always turned the TV to static. Now let me ask you something. What kind of man takes a hammer into someone's kitchen, strikes them dead, then takes the time to change the channel? A man who wants to be remembered, but not recognized. By now, Seoul's crime unit was on edge. There was talk of a phantom killer, whispers in back halls, a pattern, a timeline. But no one wanted to say it out loud, because once you name a monster, it starts to grow. And Yu? He was just getting started. Blood in the rain. It rained the night Yu killed the grandparents. Not a thunderstorm, just a soft, steady drizzle, the kind that turns the whole city into a blur of wet neon and slick sidewalks. The kind of rain that makes people stay indoors, pull their blankets tighter, and leave their windows shut. Perfect for murder. The apartment was in an older district in northwestern Seoul. A quiet, aging building. No security guard. No elevator cameras. Yu had walked up 4 flights of stairs carrying a faded brown toolbox and an umbrella that dripped deliberately on the carpet as he knocked. The door opened. An old man leaned out with a polite smile, expecting a gas inspector. "Sorry for the wait," Yu said in his usual flat voice. "Routine maintenance, just checking lines." They let him in. They always let him in. Within 12 minutes, both were dead. He used the hammer again. No screaming. No neighbors called the police. No one heard a thing. He cleaned as usual, light bleach wipe-downs, gloves disposed of in the kitchen trash. But there was something different this time. He took the woman's wedding ring, not as a trophy. He would later tell investigators, "It looked expensive. I was broke." There was no grand philosophy, no vengeance against the rich this time, just opportunism. And blood. So much of it. On the floral wallpaper, on the ceiling fan, on the door frame Yu had leaned against while watching the husband gurgle through a fractured jaw. But he didn't panic. He stayed long enough to rinse his hands in their sink, then left through the front door. He walked 6 blocks through the rain, dumped the hammer into a recycling bin outside a market, and rode the subway home like nothing happened. It would take 5 days before the neighbors complained about the smell. When the police arrived, they found the apartment locked from the inside, no sign of forced entry, no valuables missing except a ring, no witnesses, just an open window and two matching corpses with shattered skulls. That made 5 victims now, all elderly, all killed with a blunt object, all in their own homes. Still, police weren't ready to say it. They suspected a connection. But confirmation? That would require evidence. And you didn't leave any. Here's the strange fact in this section. Investigators eventually discovered that you always removed the batteries from the clocks in the rooms where he killed. No one knows why. He never explained it. But in every crime scene, the wall clock had stopped, either pulled from the socket or found with its battery missing. Some speculate he didn't want time recorded. Others say it was a power move. My favorite theory? He liked the silence. But here's where things started to shift. You didn't just want to kill. He wanted to test the system, to see how far he could go. So for the first time, he escalated. 2 murders in a single night. The victims were a retired school principal and his wife. You had followed them for 3 days before choosing the moment. He noticed they left a window cracked open for their cat to come and go. That's how he got in. He waited inside the kitchen for nearly an hour, crouched behind a cabinet while they watched TV. Then, when the credits rolled on their nightly drama, he struck. He killed the wife first. The husband didn't even make it to the hallway before he dropped. When the police examined the scene later, they noticed something chilling. The killer had eaten a banana from their fruit bowl afterward. Just one. Then placed the peel neatly on a napkin. That wasn't just strange. It was taunting. But you wasn't finished. 2 nights later, he tried again. A solo woman in her 70s. This time, he botched it. She fought back, screamed. A neighbor heard the commotion and banged on the door. You fled before finishing the job, and for the first time, he left something behind, a glove. Partial prints, no match. But now they knew. This was no random crime spree. This was a serial killer in Seoul. The media still hadn't caught on. But within the police force, an internal task force was formed. They called it Operation Night Hammer. Catchy, grim. But behind closed doors, detectives whispered something else. We're not dealing with a man. We're dealing with a ghost. That's how invisible he felt. You know what haunts me? The fact that you lived among people. He ate at ramen shops, bought batteries, went to arcades. He didn't hide in forests or bunkers. He just blended in. He was the man on the subway who sat silently, the guy behind you at the ATM, the stranger fixing your microwave. And no one knew, because no one wanted to know. Historians still debate whether cultural shame around mental illness and violent crime in South Korea allowed you to hide in plain sight. Whether society's deep desire to maintain order and face-saving harmony delayed a full investigation. I'll tell you this, he knew the silence was on his side. Back at his apartment, you washed his hands until his knuckles cracked. He wrote down the names of the streets he'd visited, drew crude floor plans from memory. And then, as always, he turned on the TV to static. He watched it like meditation. And outside, the rain kept falling. The library of horror. Let me tell you something about monsters. They don't keep secrets. They catalog them. That's what they found in Yu Young-chul's apartment later. Rows of notebooks, pages of diagrams, timelines, names. He kept everything. Victim preferences, entry points, what the walls smelled like, what each body looked like after impact, all arranged like some warped library project. He called it my study. But we're not there yet. At this point in the story, you had racked up over a dozen kills. The hammer had become more than a weapon. It was his signature. But what really set him apart wasn't the violence. It was the precision. He wasn't sloppy. He planned. And when he wasn't killing, he was reading. He became obsessed with serial killers, especially the ones who had names, Bundy, Chikatilo, Zodiac. He didn't idolize them exactly. He dissected them. studied where they failed, annotated books like textbooks, scribbled things like too proud equals caught, zodiac equals good symbols. Try this. He started drawing his own, strange ones, sharp lines, repeating spirals. One symbol, a triangle made of smaller triangles, kept showing up over and over. When asked what it meant, he just said, "It's how I stay in control." Yu was trying to build a mythology, not just kill. He wanted to matter, to leave a mark, not in blood, but in structure. He even began recording himself, not videos, tapes, cassettes, the old kind. He'd sit in the dark and talk softly for hours, narrating his own thoughts, reading passages from books about murder, whispering things like, "They're not innocent. None of them. You know that." The tapes were filled with ambient noise, creaking chairs, TV static, the distant sound of traffic. Some psychologists who analyzed the audio later said it sounded more like a meditation than a confession. One tape ends with him laughing for over 3 minutes. Here's the strange fact of this part. Yu once applied to work as a night security guard at an art museum. He didn't get the job, but in the application form he listed his special skill as understanding patterns. That application would later be used in court to show his cognitive clarity. Because Yu wasn't insane, not in the legal way. He wasn't hearing voices, he was making them. Let's talk about his apartment for a second. It was small, barely 20 square meters, one window, low ceilings. His mattress was on the floor. But what stood out wasn't the space, it was the walls. He had covered them in newspaper clippings, but not of his own crimes. News about foreign killers, political corruption, articles about failing systems, social decay, suicide rates. He was building context, his own twisted justification. He wrote notes in red pen across headlines. "They made me. This is what happens when no one listens. Cleansing necessary." Scholars still debate whether Yu's self-image as a kind of avenging moral figure was genuine, or a lie he repeated until he believed it. Some argue that this messianic delusion was his attempt to elevate himself from a nobody to a corrective force. Others say it was nothing more than ego dressed up in nihilism. But the fact remains, he saw himself as important. He wasn't just killing to kill. He was trying to say something. And what he was saying was ugly. Now, around this time, a low-level officer noticed something odd. He was reviewing several old crime scene photos when he realized that in every single one, the TVs had been tampered with, turned to static or unplugged mid-broadcast. It was such a subtle thing, it hadn't even made the reports. The officer brought it up in a briefing. "Maybe it's the same guy," he said. "Maybe we've got a serial." The room went quiet, because if that were true, they'd failed. Publicly. Massively. No one wanted to say it out loud, but suddenly, every unsolved homicide from the last 2 years was being revisited. Patterns were emerging. Doorways, raincoats, kitchen knives left untouched on counters, and still no suspect. Because Yu had no online footprint, no car, no active job, no phone in his name. He was a ghost in his own city. And that's when he made his first real mistake. He bragged to a woman he was seeing, casual, part-time, not serious. Over soju, he joked, "You should be glad I like you. Some girls I make disappear." She laughed, but a week later she told a friend. That friend worked in law enforcement. The report went nowhere, though. No follow-up, no interview. Because Yu still hadn't been connected to any of it. But the walls were closing in. Slowly. And Yu? He kept reading, kept planning. He said he wanted to write a book one day. Not a confession, he told himself on tape, an explanation. Because he didn't want to be seen as a man. He wanted to be remembered as a philosophy. The hammer in the park. It was almost a perfect crime, but almost doesn't mean much when you forget the dog. That night, Yu Young-chul had picked his next victims, a retired couple who lived on the edge of Bukhansan National Park. Quiet neighborhood, low traffic, perfect visibility from the street. He'd watched them for 3 days, learned their patterns. They always took a walk after dinner, returned just after 8 p.m. He knocked on their door at 7:58, toolbox in hand, calm expression, the smell of rain still clinging to his shirt. They let him in. By 8:06, they were both dead. But by 8:09, a woman named Kim Ji-won was walking her schnauzer near the building. The dog stopped suddenly, barked, whined, pulled its leash toward the hedge. Ji-won didn't think much of it until she heard something. Not a scream, a thud, soft but sharp, like a chair falling sideways. Then another. Then a sound like metal on tile. And then silence. She stood there, heart starting to race. The dog kept growling, and that's when she saw him. A man coming down the fire escape fast, not running, but with purpose. He didn't look back, didn't notice her, just adjusted his hood and kept walking, toolbox in hand, like he was late for a shift. She remembered his face later as wrong. Not ugly, just wrong, like something had been wiped off it. She called the police. Now, here's the part that could have changed everything. When the officers arrived, they found the door ajar. The smell of bleach, 2 bodies, same MO, hammer trauma, no fingerprints, static on the TV. But this time, they had something else, a hammer. He dropped it on the way out. It was slick with blood, partially wiped clean, but not enough. The forensics team recovered a partial palm print and hair fibers, not enough for an arrest, but enough to know this guy was real. This was the break they'd been waiting for. And yet, the case didn't break. Because somehow, despite pressuring labs, cross-checking prints, and issuing internal alerts, no ID came back. Yu's prints weren't in the system under his real name. The records from his prior arrests had been filed incorrectly under one of his aliases. So the hammer sat in evidence, and Yu walked free. Let's pause here for a strange fact. The hammer Yu used wasn't just any hammer. It was a mason's hammer, short, heavy, with a chisel tip on one side. Not the kind you'd use to hang a painting. The kind you use to break concrete. He bought it from a hardware stall in Namdaman Market and kept it wrapped in an old baby blanket in his closet. He said the blanket made it quiet. Now, back to the scene. The witness, Ji-won, described the man in detail. Mid-30s, average height, dark windbreaker, slight limp. The detail that stood out? His toolbox had stickers on it. One was peeling off. Police began checking repairmen, canvassing known offenders. Nothing. And Yu? He watched the news that night, saw the blurred photos of the crime scene on the evening broadcast, smiled, said later they still had no idea. He moved fast, burned the toolbox, bought a new coat, dyed his hair, threw out his mattress. For 2 weeks he laid low, but he couldn't stop. Yu had started to feel invincible. He believed Seoul was asleep, that the police were chasing ghosts and shadows while he walked among them, invisible. So, he shifted tactics again, started targeting sex workers once more, women who worked from motels, the kind no one checked on unless rent was overdue. He'd meet them late, always with cash, always polite. And then he'd do what he did. But this time, he changed his post-murder routine. He began redressing the bodies, fully clothed, carefully arranged. He'd even reapply their lipstick, comb their hair, lay them back on the bed and whisper, "Sleep now." Yu later claimed this was out of respect. But respect doesn't come with fractured cheekbones and crushed ribs. It was control. Still, always. And again, the police didn't link the crimes because these murders looked different, different location, different victim profile. No hammer, no bleach. They thought it was a different killer. And Yu took that as a compliment. Historians are still debating whether this shift in victim type was a strategic move or a psychological compulsion. Some believe Yu's rage was spiraling out of control. He couldn't keep to one pattern anymore. Others argue he was testing the limits of law enforcement, trying to see how many styles he could get away with. But regardless of intent, the outcome was the same. Bodies kept showing up, and the headlines stayed small. The public didn't know. The city kept moving. And Yu, as always, kept collecting his clippings. Here's the image I can't shake. A man sitting alone in his tiny apartment, static humming from the television, a hammer on the floor, a tape recorder whirring beside him, and in his hands a page torn from the newspaper. Another nameless victim. Another quiet triumph. Because to Yu Young Chul, murder wasn't chaos, it was documentation. The whisper tapes. Before you sleep, I want to tell you something strange. You've heard of serial killers keeping trophies. Some take jewelry, some keep teeth. Yu Young Chul? He kept whispers, tape recordings. When they raided his apartment, detectives found a cheap portable tape recorder, gray plastic, scratched buttons sticky from use. Beside it were dozens of cassettes, handwritten labels, numbers instead of names, no dates. Tape 1, tape 4, tape 9. They almost missed them. The apartment was filthy. Unwashed clothes, cheap instant noodles stacked in corners, and a smell like dust and mold soaked into the walls. But someone opened a drawer under the sink and found them, tucked behind a cleaning rag. When they pressed play, silence at first. Then, breath. Shaky, hesitant, sometimes sobbing. Sometimes a voice would stammer a name, ask where they were, plead. No screams. Just people trying to be polite, even as they knew something was wrong. One woman said, "Sir, if it's about the money, I can." And then the tape clicked off. You kept them in sequence, not for pleasure, at least not in the usual sense. He said it was for clarity, for documentation, like he was studying his own cruelty in slow motion, like a surgeon reviewing post-op footage. He listened to them late at night, with the lights off. Now, here's the strange fact. Out of the dozens of tapes, one, just one, featured Yu's own voice. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't laughing. He was whispering something over and over. They don't know me. They never will. It plays 3 times. Then the tape ends. Back to the story. Police still hadn't caught him. After the hammer incident, Yu had dropped off their radar. The woman who saw him couldn't be certain in a lineup. Her description was generic, too clean to pin down. But inside his own mind, Yu was already famous. He started writing. Not a diary, a manifesto. He called it the Book of Revenge. Spiral-bound, college-ruled paper. Neat handwriting. Nearly 20 pages of rants, lists, and rules. He described society as rotten beyond repair, said the elite had betrayed their duty to the poor, that the sex workers were instruments of corruption, and that the elderly clung to life like cowards. His mission? To purify Seoul with blood. At one point he wrote, "They will remember me when they can no longer recognize themselves." This is where the scholarly debate begins. Some psychologists argue Yu wasn't a classic serial killer. His pattern was too erratic, his motives more ideological than sexual. Others say that's just posturing. He was a textbook predator with a god complex, hiding behind fake philosophy to give his urges weight. What's clear is, Yu wanted more than violence. He wanted legacy. He started choosing victims that would shake the city, judges, academics, philanthropists. But killing them wasn't always easy. So he went for proxies. Family members, staff, people nearby. In one case, he followed a professor's housekeeper home and killed her instead. Later he wrote, "If they feel grief, it's the same as if I struck them." He started adding more layers. Rituals. After killing, he'd wash his hands in the victim's sink. Turn off the fridge. Unplug the TV. Rearrange family photos to face the wall. Small things. Weird things. But to him, they were signs. Like leaving his signature in invisible ink. There's one detail that never made the newspapers. Yu had a mirror in his hallway, right beside the door. After every murder, before he left, he'd stop and look into it. Just for a second. Like he needed to make sure he still existed. He once said during questioning, "The mirror tells the truth. The news only tells stories." So he checked his reflection after every kill. Not for guilt, not for pride, just to make sure. This part of his ritual became so important, he began breaking into his next target's home days in advance just to hang a mirror. One woman had no mirror in her apartment, so Yu brought one himself, a cheap one, cracked in the corner. He left it in the hallway, just so he'd have somewhere to look after. He was unraveling, but precise. And that's what made it all the more terrifying. Now let me tell you about tape 13. It's only 22 seconds long. Starts with the sound of a door creaking open, heavy breathing, then the voice of a man, calm, quiet, deliberate. He says, "I see you now. Do you see me?" Then a click. End. Forensic audio specialists enhanced it, analyzed background noise, determined it was recorded in a stairwell, possibly an apartment block, but they never matched the sound to a specific location. Who the voice was talking to? Still unknown. Some say it was a victim. Some think he was talking to himself. Others believe he was speaking to us. At this point, there were at least 13 victims, probably more. But the police still weren't connecting the dots. Each crime scene felt like a one-off. Some involved sex workers, others wealthy retirees. A few were in hotels, a few in private homes, different neighborhoods, different weapons. The press didn't know yet. The city was sleepwalking. But you? He was wide awake. He shaved his head, changed his walk, bought gloves 2 sizes too big so his fingerprints wouldn't transfer properly. He even practiced smiling in the mirror to seem less threatening. And he started walking at night again, under bridges, near convenience stores, outside subway exits, watching, waiting. If someone made eye contact, he looked away. If someone smiled, he wrote their name down. Because the next phase was about lists. But that's for next time. Word count, the list in the ashtray. I need to warn you. The deeper we go, the harder it gets to pretend this is just a story. Because Yu Young-chul didn't just drift into evil, he built it, like a house, brick by brick, entry by entry. And in that house, there were lists. Before we get to that, though, here's something strange. Among the garbage and roaches in his apartment, police found a metal ashtray. Basic, scratched chrome, the kind you'd find in a gas station or maybe a grimy pool hall. But inside it, not cigarette butts, tiny slips of folded paper, dozens. Each had a name, a date, and one of 3 words, finished, in progress, too risky. It was his system, his diary of death, hidden in plain sight. One of the papers just said, "Girl, black coat, subway line 2, Fridays." No name, no date, just an observation. Another one, "Judge housekeeper, watch for car." Finished. Now here's the unusual fact. Some of the names in the ashtray didn't correspond to any known murders. At least 3 of them, police checked, belonged to people who were still alive. 2 were unreachable. One had moved overseas 6 years earlier. Theories? You bet. Some believe they were intended victims he couldn't reach. Others think the entries were practice, ways to refine his selection criteria. But one criminologist suggested something darker. Maybe you believed he had killed them. Psychotic delusions can cause false memories, she said in a radio interview. But with you, it may have been something else entirely. A sense of ownership. Like once he had seen someone, he owned the idea of their death. The police didn't broadcast the ashtray publicly. Too confusing, too fragmented. But internally, they began to call it the orbit list, because the names all had something in common. Every person on it had passed through the same 3 districts in Seoul: Gangnam, Yeongdeungpo, and Jongno, Yu's hunting ground, his triangle. And now it was becoming clear. He wasn't just choosing victims randomly. He was watching who wandered into his space. The orbit list helped prosecutors later establish patterns of intent. But at the time, the cops still didn't know what they were dealing with. Until July 2004. That's when you made a mistake. No theatrics, no manifesto, just one bad night. He picked a woman up near Seoul Station. She was young, nervous, and wearing a blue windbreaker. Not his usual type. He told her his name was Park, said he had a hotel room nearby. She agreed to go. What happened next was textbook you, until she bit him. Hard, on the hand. He lost his grip for a moment, enough time for her to sprint. She ran barefoot through the hallway, screaming. Someone called security. He followed her down the stairwell, bleeding, but he didn't know there were cameras this time. They got his face. Fuzzy. Partial. But they finally had an image to circulate. The next day it aired on the local news. Person of interest in Gangnam assault case. Most viewers ignored it. But one cop didn't. Detective Kim Jun-ho had been tracking a string of unsolved murders over the past year. Sex workers, retirees, all dead by blunt force trauma, all in Yu's triangle. He saw the footage, looked up from his desk and said, "That's our guy." Now here's where historians still debate the timeline. Some argue the cops had enough to catch Yu earlier, if only they'd centralized the murder cases. Others claim he was too careful, too random, that the systems in place weren't built for someone like him. Either way, what followed was fast. 2 nights later, Yu returned to Seoul Station. Same stairwell, same routine, only this time police were waiting. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just smiled. They arrested him without resistance, searched his pockets, found the usual, gloves, tape, a folded grocery list that didn't make sense, and tucked into his sock a crumpled receipt from a hardware store dated 3 weeks prior. On the back of the receipt, another name. Handwritten, misspelled, but traceable. It belonged to a woman reported missing 2 days earlier. Police brought Yu in, asked basic questions. He asked for a cigarette. Then he said, "I'll tell you everything, but only if I get to talk first." The next 6 hours were chaos. He rambled, laughed, cried. Claimed to be cleansing the city. Said God had whispered instructions to him through static on the TV. Claimed the hammer was a holy object. But buried in the madness? He named 14 specific victims, locations, methods, reasons, and then casually added, "But that's just the ones I remember." He didn't know all the names, but he knew the details. How many steps to the hallway, how long it took them to beg, what the fridge smelled like afterward. That was the beginning of the end. The media caught on like wildfire. The Seoul hammer killer, the human butcher, killer of the lost voice. And you? He liked the attention. In fact, he started talking more, demanded interviews, wrote letters from prison. One of them ended with a quote from Nietzsche. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process, he does not become one. Then, below that, in all caps, he wrote, "Too late." I'll leave you with this. Of the original names in the ashtray, 3 were never identified. Not even now. No matches, no missing persons reports, no family inquiries. Just ghosts folded into metal. And he never explained those ones. Next, we'll go inside the trial. And it gets even stranger. The courtroom theater. Before I tell you what he said in court, I want you to picture something. It's morning. The fluorescent lights of the Seoul Central District Court buzz slightly. The hallway smells like warm printer paper and industrial soap. There's a faint echo of camera shutters. And in the center of it all sits Yu Chul, handcuffed, thin, his orange detention jumpsuit hanging off him like laundry on a wire. He doesn't blink when the cameras flash. He just tilts his head slightly like a curious dog. That was July 2004, the first public court appearance, and it was chaos. Outside the courtroom, protesters held signs that said "Burn him" and "No mercy for the devil." Inside, every seat was taken. The judge issued a warning for silence, but it didn't help. People gasped, whispered. One woman fainted. Now here's your strange fact. In a bizarre twist of policy, Yu almost wasn't tried in open court. Due to South Korea's laws protecting sensitive trial content, his defense initially filed for closed proceedings, citing graphic content. The court considered it for 3 full days. But then Yu objected. He wanted the public. He said, "If the world wants to see a monster, let them come." Yeah, that's a real quote. So the trial became a media frenzy. The gallery was packed. Reporters jostled for seats. A criminal psychology professor later said, "This wasn't justice, it was theater." And Yu was the director. The prosecution laid it out methodically. Blunt force trauma, sexual violence, premeditation. They showed photos, one after another. Yu, he didn't look away once. His lawyer tried to mount a defense based on diminished capacity. Yu had a documented brain injury from his teen years. At age 17, he was hit in the head with a metal bar during a gang fight. He'd had seizures and blackouts ever since. The argument was this: he couldn't fully understand the consequences of his actions. But that didn't hold, because then Yu spoke, and that's when things got truly chilling. He told the court clearly, coherently, that he knew exactly what he was doing, that the people he killed were vermin, that the world was better without them, and that he had only just begun. He smiled after every statement, calm, deliberate. He said, "You are all going to sleep tonight, but I want you to imagine this, that every time you close your eyes, there's someone like me walking behind you, counting your steps." Some jurors later said they felt physically ill. Now here's where the scholarly debate comes in. Some experts believe Yu was a textbook psychopath, high-functioning, emotionally flat, fully aware. Others argue his language was performative, that he was mimicking what he thought serial killers were supposed to sound like. There's still disagreement on whether he was mentally ill or just monstrously self-aware. The court had to make that decision. So they brought in neurologists, they scanned his brain, ran tests, asked questions, and the results? He showed zero signs of delusion, no hallucinations, no schizophrenia, no memory loss. What they found instead was something colder, an unusually high activity level in his orbitofrontal cortex, the part associated with reward-seeking behavior and lack of empathy. It's been seen in other serial offenders, but rarely this pronounced. It was, as one expert put it, like a machine built for impulse without brakes. By the time they reached closing arguments, no one doubted what he was anymore. Even Yu agreed. He said, "Don't give me prison, give me hell." That's not metaphor. He said that out loud. But South Korea doesn't use the death penalty anymore, not actively. It still exists on the books, but hasn't been carried out since 1997. Still, the judge didn't hesitate. Death. One word. And Yu, incredibly, laughed, like he'd just heard a joke. He was led out of the courtroom smiling, humming something. No one could quite tell what the tune was. One guard said it might have been a TV jingle. Now let's zoom out for a second. There's a photo from that day. Widely circulated. You've probably seen it. Yu's head turned toward the camera, one eye closed from the flash, grinning like a game show host. But here's something most people missed. If you look closely at his wrists in that photo, you can see faint, fresh scratches. Not from the cuffs, from himself. Police noted later that he'd tried to carve something into his arm the night before. A single word in Hangul. Boksu. Revenge. Against who? He never said. Maybe the world. Maybe the people he thought wronged him. Maybe just a symbol. Another performance. After the sentencing, he was transferred to Seoul Detention Center. Still alive, still on death row, still talking to anyone who would listen. But the story wasn't over yet, because soon, letters started arriving from other inmates, from fans, and from a group that believed Yu wasn't working alone. That's where we're going next. Copycats and conspiracies. You're not going to like this part, but you need to hear it. After Yu Young-chul was sentenced to death, the world should have gone quiet. No more interviews, no more headlines, just silence. That's how these things are supposed to end. But Yu didn't disappear. In fact, he became louder. Within a month of his conviction, prison staff reported something unsettling. He was receiving dozens of letters. Some hateful, sure. Some from curious journalists. But others were praising him. And a few, they were asking for advice. Yeah, you heard that right. One letter, smuggled out later and verified by prison officials, opened with, open quote, "Master Yu, your clarity inspires me. I feel like the world finally makes sense." Close quote. That's real. And it wasn't the only one. So here's your strange fact. In 2005, South Korean authorities quietly launched an internal investigation into what they referred to as potential ideological transmission from high-profile inmates. They feared that Yu's crimes were not only being emulated, but revered. They weren't wrong. The following year, police in Busan arrested a 23-year-old man who had murdered a massage parlor worker using a claw hammer. His apartment wall had a photo of Yu pinned next to a handwritten quote, open quote, "They don't deserve to breathe," close quote. The media called him the Yu copycat, and he wasn't the last. Over the next 3 years, there were 5 separate violent crimes in South Korea that drew eerie similarities to Yu's method: attacks on vulnerable women, use of blunt force weapons, and staged crime scenes. Now, don't panic. These weren't serial killers, and most were apprehended quickly. But the influence was clear. And here's where the conspiracy theories took root. In late 2006, a fringe group calling themselves the Cleansers released a grainy video online. It showed 4 masked individuals in a warehouse-like room reciting from a manifesto. They claimed to believe in Yu's purification ideology, that society needed to be purged of the unworthy. One wore a red jumpsuit, another held a hammer. The video lasted only 90 seconds and ended with the phrase, open quote, "We are many. He was first. We are next." Close quote. Yeah, it sounds like something out of a bad horror movie, but the government didn't think it was funny. The National Intelligence Service, NIS, tracked the video's origin to a server in Tokyo. From there, things got complicated. Diplomatic entanglements, dead ends, and then, suddenly, silence. The video disappeared. The group was never officially linked to any crime, but online forums still talk about them today, like an urban legend. Some say the Cleansers still exist. Others say it was just a prank by edgy students. But scholars aren't so quick to dismiss it. Criminologists have long debated whether serial killers like Yu can inspire movements, ideological frameworks. Not cults in the traditional sense, but mimetic ideologies, where violence becomes a kind of ritualized belief system. There's still no consensus. But one thing is clear: Yu's image lingered. In 2007, an art student was suspended from Seoul National University for submitting a sculpture of Yu's face in polished bronze, mounted on a pedestal made of fake blood bags. The piece was titled "The Mirror of Society." It caused a nationwide uproar. Some defended it as art. Others called it a glorification of evil. Even Yu commented on it. He said, "Tell the artist I like the angle. Make me look taller next time." See what I mean? This guy was never done. He gave more interviews. He wrote poetry in prison. He claimed to be studying law so he could correct the record. And he kept insisting that he was only part of a larger idea. In one interview, he said, open quote, "There are others. They're smarter than me. They don't get caught. I just wanted to be seen." Close quote. That quote sent the internet into overdrive. Suddenly, Reddit threads popped up connecting Yu to unsolved crimes from the early 90s. People started revisiting older cold cases. One even claimed Yu was part of an international network of selective executioners. No proof, just shadows and paranoia. Still, historians are still debating whether these copycats were isolated incidents or if Yu genuinely started something deeper, an ideology, however fractured, rooted in resentment, superiority, and theatrical violence. And then there's this. In 2009, guards at Seoul Detention Center intercepted a letter Yu tried to send. It was addressed to someone in Daejeon. No name, just a set of numbers and a drawing. The drawing was of a hammer. Underneath it, in broken Hangul, "Still working?" The letter was confiscated. The recipient was never identified. Creepy? Definitely. But also, what if he was just messing with us? Yu was always a showman, always aware of the stage. He once told a guard, "The world is my audience, and I'll give them an encore even in chains." You want to hear the worst part? In a 2010 poll of 1,000 South Korean university students, 7% said they found Yu fascinating, and 2% said they understood his motivations. That's a small number, but not small enough. The legacy of Yu Young-chul didn't end with his sentence. It metastasized in jokes, in whispers, in imitators, and maybe, just maybe, in people who looked at what he did and saw not horror but permission. We like to think justice ends things, but sometimes it just marks the start of a new story. Next time, we're going to walk into the mind of Yu himself, what psychiatrists learned from their one-on-one sessions, what he admitted, what he denied, and the secrets he kept even from them. That's where it gets really strange. Inside the mind, sessions with a monster. Before we go any further, I need you to do something. Breathe in, slowly. Let it out. Because what you're about to hear isn't just disturbing, it's confusing. Like walking through a maze where every turn smells like antiseptic and every exit leads you right back to the monster you swore you understood. Forensic psychologists in Seoul still talk about the sessions they had with Yu Young-chul. Between 2004 and 2007, more than a dozen clinical interviews were conducted. These weren't just diagnostic check-ins, they were full-scale explorations of why he did what he did. And Yu? He loved it. He sat in the interview room like a man on a press tour, always clean-shaven, always with a small smile. He called one psychiatrist Doc Hannibal, a twisted joke that nobody laughed at. He seemed proud of that. Now here's your strange fact. Yu brought drawings to his interviews. Pencil sketches, distorted faces, scribbled spirals, and one image he drew over and over again. A house on a hill with no windows, no doors, just shadows. When asked what it meant, he said, open quote, "That's where I live when I'm dreaming." Close quote. Not creepy at all, right? Psychiatrists tried to diagnose him within standard parameters: antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and possible signs of schizotypal thinking. He ticked a lot of boxes: lack of empathy, manipulative behavior, pathological lying. But Yu didn't fit neatly anywhere. One doctor, Dr. Lee Jae-won, famously said, open quote, "He is not insane in the legal sense. He knows right from wrong, but he is profoundly unreal," close quote. What did that mean? Well, it meant Yu performed madness like it was theater. When convenient, he'd speak in riddles. When pressed, he'd become lucid and articulate. He flipped between personas like TV channels. One time, when asked how he chose his victims, he replied, open quote, "It's not about who they are, it's about the silence they leave behind." Close quote. That made everyone uncomfortable. He also referred to his murders as projects. He didn't see them as spontaneous or chaotic. He claimed they were designed, measured, even mathematical. There's one moment I can't stop thinking about. In a 2006 session, Yu was shown photos of his victims. Their names were read aloud slowly, like a prayer. He didn't flinch, not until they reached photo number 12, an older woman who had worked as a night cleaner at a university. Yu looked at that picture for 11 seconds, then said, open quote, "She reminded me of someone who used to help me. I stopped being angry for a minute. Then I finished anyway." Close quote. That's all. That's all he gave. And yet, even that made doctors pause, because it hinted at something, a buried memory, a crack in the machine. Scholars are still debating whether Yu had what's called episodic flashes of recognition that never affected his behavior. It's like his emotional hardware was briefly turned on, only to flicker out. But there's more. He was asked to keep a dream journal during his time in solitary. Over 3 months, he wrote 43 entries. Most were nonsense. But one entry, dated February 4th, 2007, still haunts the lead psychiatrist. Open quote, "I was standing on the hill again. The house was gone. In its place was a mirror. And in it, I saw myself smiling with red hands. But I couldn't move. Then I saw another me, walking away." Close quote. What do you even do with that? Some people believe Yu used these interviews to manipulate the narrative, to create a version of himself that would live longer in the public mind. Others think he was genuinely unraveling. He often contradicted himself, especially when talking about motive. Sometimes it was rage against women. Sometimes it was about wealth inequality. Other times he claimed to be punishing moral decay. One session summary reads, open quote, "Subject shifts rapidly between justification and performance. He desires control, not just over victims, but over how he is remembered." Close quote. That's why they eventually stopped the sessions. He wasn't giving answers. He was writing a screenplay. Still, the clinical team couldn't shake one detail. At the end of each interview, you would say the same thing, like a sign-off. Open quote, "Thank you for listening. I hope it helps." Close quote. And he'd smile. There's something grotesque about that politeness, right? Like watching a snake say, "Excuse me," before it strikes. After the last session, you reportedly turned to one guard and said, open quote, "They wanted to find the monster. I just gave them the mirror." Close quote. And maybe that's exactly what he wanted. Not to be understood, but to make everyone else question themselves. Their institutions, their safety, their sanity. That idea, the mirror, it kept coming back. Psychiatrists later revealed that Yu's fixation on reflection showed up in his cell drawings, his word choice, even in how he structured his murders, often staging bodies in positions that faced windows, mirrors, or polished surfaces. He once said, open quote, "If they look at me long enough, they'll see what they are." Close quote. Chilling, right? And yet, despite all that insight, all those hours of analysis, the team couldn't crack him. Yu walked into prison a killer. He stayed a killer. And he'll likely die one. Because South Korea hasn't executed anyone since 1997. Yu sits on death row, but the sentence is symbolic. He's alive, writing, dreaming, drawing. We're not done yet. Next time, I'll take you through what happened when Yu retracted his confession to one of the murders. Yeah, just one. A twist you probably didn't see coming. And what that says about control, memory, and maybe the one lie that slipped through the cracks. The vanishing confession, what he took back. There's something worse than a confession. It's a retraction. See, when someone like Yu Young-chul confesses to 20 murders, you're not supposed to feel relief. But people did. Not because justice was served, but because at least the darkness had a name, a shape, a number. But then he took one of them back. It was 2006, 2 years after his arrest. He was still being analyzed, still drawing his creepy little shadow houses in prison journals, still playing polite with guards and psychiatrists. That's when a statement leaked. Yu claimed he didn't kill victim number 14, Lee Ji-won, a 26-year-old woman who had gone missing in September 2003. This wasn't some hazy, I don't remember backpedaling. He was specific. He said, open quote, "I never met her. I included her because I thought she fit." Close quote. What does that even mean? That word fit made people furious. Fit what? A pattern? A checklist? A fantasy? Detectives were stunned. Ji-won's remains had been found in a shallow grave along the Inwang Mountain hiking trail. Same as other victims. Same weapon impressions. Same post-mortem ritual. Her file was closed. But now? Now it was back open. Let me give you the strange fact of this section. Ji-won's ID card was never recovered. Every other victim had some form of ID returned, placed either on or near the body. Yu liked things neat, like labeling his kills. But with Ji-won, there was nothing. No ID, no phone, no connection. And just like that, conspiracy threads started spinning. Was Ji-won really killed by someone else? A 2007 task force report examined the inconsistencies. The angle of the skull fracture was slightly off. The ligature used wasn't Yu's usual type. And there were 2 partial shoe prints near the body. Size 9 boots. Yu wore size 10. Still, the prosecution dismissed the retraction as a manipulation tactic. They said Yu wanted to stir the pot again. Get back into the headlines. Confessions were power to him, and so were their withdrawals. But a retired officer I spoke with in an interview years later told a different story. He said, open quote, "You knew the victim's name before it was public. That only made sense if he did it. But retracting it, that messed with our heads." Close quote. Jiwon's family, already living in a storm of grief, was dragged through another round of uncertainty. They were asked if she had any enemies, any boyfriends, anyone who might have copied Yu's methods. And guess what? They said she'd been afraid before she vanished. But not of a stranger, of a man who followed her home from work once. A man who asked if she knew about the Echo Project. What that meant, nobody knew. Here's where things get blurry. Historians are still debating whether Jiwon's death marked the entrance of a copycat, someone mimicking Yu's crimes just closely enough to slip in among them. The idea wasn't entirely new. After all, Yu himself admitted to modeling his early kills on foreign serial killers. So what if someone was doing the same to him? The theory gained momentum in 2008 when an anonymous letter was sent to a journalist covering the case. No fingerprints, no return address, just 5 typed lines. Open quote, "You lied. I know, because I watched her die. The mountain wasn't his territory. He just took the credit. No one's looking for me. Thanks for that." Close quote. That letter has never been authenticated. Police said it was likely a hoax. But the journalist said one thing in an interview that stuck with me. Open quote, "The paper smelled like antiseptic, like a hospital or a lab." Close quote. Now, that could be nothing, or it could be another breadcrumb. Because Jiwon had been doing volunteer work at a free clinic in the months before her death. One of the clients she'd seen multiple times was a man with a deep scar under his chin, described as soft-spoken and always wearing a hoodie. But there was no name on the intake form, just an alias, Patient 073. And yeah, the clinic's records for that year? Destroyed in a fire in early 2004. Convenient. So what did you gain from this retraction? Power? Yes. But maybe something else, maybe insulation. If you muddy your timeline just enough, you make every fact suspect, even your own. Remember, Yu wasn't just a killer. He was a storyteller. He wanted the script in his hands, right down to the edits. And this was a deliberate rewrite. Prosecutors never removed Jiwon from the official victim list. But some investigators, they still circle her case number in red, because it doesn't fit. Not completely. There's a term used in psychological profiling, spillage. It refers to when one case spills into another. When killers learn from each other, echo each other, repeat each other. The real question here is, did someone echo Yu, or did he echo someone else? Because one final unsettling detail came up in Jiwon's case. Her body was found with something in her left hand. It wasn't listed in the original evidence photos, but a coroner's assistant remembered it. It was a red marble. None of Yu's other victims had anything like that. Not a toy. Not a symbol, nothing. And you know what red marbles show up in? Urban legends, Korean horror stories. They're associated with ghosts who won't stop watching you. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And if you're still with me, post your location and local time. I like seeing where people are listening from. Helps me sleep too. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. Because next time, we're going back to the beginning. To the first body. To the moment you stopped being invisible. To the night that Seoul officially knew the monster had a name. First body, how it all started. Before you sleep, I want you to picture this. A small apartment in Mapo-gu. Late summer. The fan is broken, the windows are shut, and the TV is on low. An old drama playing reruns with that grainy late-night hiss. And on the floor, barely visible under a sheet, is the body of a 72-year-old woman named Lee Sung-ja. This is how it starts. This is how it really started. Forget the headlines, the courtroom sketches, and the FBI profile graphics on your favorite true crime show. Forget the serial killer manifestos and horrorcore documentaries. This whole thing, this storm, began in one room, with one old woman. Yu Young-chul broke in sometime after 2 a.m. He was unemployed, broke, recently divorced, drifting between low-rent motels and internet cafes. The press would later call this period his incubation phase. But that's the wrong word, because incubation implies waiting, planning. Yu didn't wait. He just snapped. The strange fact? He didn't bring a weapon. That's important, because if you've read about serial killers, and I know you have, you'll notice many of them carry a kit, something organized. Blades, duct tape, gloves, rope. They think ahead. Yu didn't. Not that night. He found a hammer in her apartment and used it. Crude, loud, risky, but quick. That's what made investigators so baffled. There was no clear sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, and no sign of sexual assault, no motive. And so the police ruled it a robbery gone wrong. Except nothing was stolen. Her wallet was untouched, jewelry box still on the dresser. Even her phone and bank books were neatly placed on her nightstand. He took nothing. Yu would later say, open quote, "I just wanted to try it. I hated the rich." Close quote. But Mrs. Lee wasn't rich. She was retired, lived modestly. Her son said she still washed plastic bags to reuse them. So what did he mean? This is where the scholarly debate begins. Psychologists still argue whether Yu's first murder was spontaneous or the beginning of a long-planned fantasy. His later interviews contradict each other. Sometimes he says he heard a voice, other times he blames society, and occasionally he just shrugs. But the detail that keeps researchers up at night? He came back to the apartment 2 nights later, not to clean up, just to stand in the hallway and listen. He said, open quote, "I wanted to hear if the air felt different, like death left something behind." Close quote. Okay. That's not something you hear every day. What does that mean? It's like he wanted to feel the presence of the crime, like a souvenir, but not physical, an echo, an imprint, something that would whisper back to him in the dark. Now, back then, Seoul wasn't panicking. Nobody had any idea that this was the start of anything. Old people die all the time. And if there's no clear sign of struggle, no witness, and nothing missing, the police move on. It took 6 more murders before they realized there was a pattern. You might think, how can a guy go around killing people without leaving a trail? But that's the thing. Yu was unremarkable. He looked average. He acted average. He didn't brag. He didn't send letters. He didn't taunt the cops. He just kept going. But the first victim, that one set the tone. She was elderly. She lived alone. No cameras, no dogs, no neighborhood watch. And once Yu realized how easy that was, the blueprint was drawn. He started watching real estate ads. You heard me. He looked for properties listed by elderly owners, ones marked as widowed or no family or selling due to health. Then he would pose as a potential buyer, get their address, schedule a visit, show up early, kill them. Just like that. The real estate tactic wouldn't be discovered until months later. When investigators found notes in Yu's locker at a bathhouse, he'd written down addresses, prices, and what times looked safest. His victims were on a list, numbered, but not the first. Mrs. Lee wasn't on any list, because she wasn't meant to be part of anything. She was a test, and the worst part, he passed. You ever wonder what makes a person start? What's the click that flips the switch? Here's a theory. Not mine, but from a profiler in Busan who studied Yu's early years. She said, open quote, "The first kill is a mirror. It doesn't show what they've done. It shows what they're capable of becoming." Close quote. Yu didn't just see a dead woman. He saw the door open. There's one more detail, and I don't know if this means anything, but I'll tell you anyway. On the wall of Mrs. Lee's bedroom, police noted something odd during their investigation. A framed painting, cheap, mass-produced, of a red gate in a foggy field, probably from a street market. But after her death, the painting was found on the floor, leaning face down against the wall. No one could explain how it got there. There was no sign of struggle in that part of the room. The nail was still in the wall. The wire was intact. It's like someone had taken it down quietly. Or maybe it had fallen. But you, in an early interview, mentioned something unprompted. Open quote. There was a red door. I remember that. It was open. Close quote. What did he mean? Was he talking about the painting or something else? You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And if you're still with me, post your location and local time. I like seeing where people are listening from. Helps me sleep, too. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. Because next time, we're going to see how it all unraveled. The clue you didn't plan. The body that screamed too loud the moment it all fell apart. The one who screamed when everything unraveled. You know how they say most serial killers get caught because of one mistake? Yu Young Chul made his on a Tuesday. It wasn't even a complicated one. No camera, no DNA, no secret witness. Just one sound, one human, instinctive sound that shattered everything he'd built. A scream. But let's slow it down. It's September 2004. Yu is nearly at the end of his spree. By now, he's killed at least 20 people, mostly elderly. Then, sex workers, always vulnerable, always invisible in the eyes of the public. That's part of what kept him going. He targeted people society had already ignored. But this time, things didn't go as planned. The victim was a woman named Kang Mi-yeon, 26 years old. She worked out of a massage parlor near the Gangnam Station. Yu found her through a classified ad in a tabloid. He had started doing this more frequently, posing as a client, inviting women to his apartment in Western Seoul and murdering them there. Cold, systematic, efficient. But Mi-yeon did something the others hadn't. She fought back. According to his later confession, Yu had already struck her once. She was on the ground, dazed, but not unconscious. And when he turned to grab the cord he used to bind his victims, she screamed. Not just screamed, shrieked, loud, high, panicked, and most importantly, heard. Neighbors in his apartment building would later say they'd gotten used to Yu being quiet, polite, kept to himself. Some said he left food outside for stray cats. But that night, a tenant 2 floors below thought she heard a woman's voice yelling something like, "Help me," or "No." She didn't call the police. Not at first, but she told the building manager the next morning. And that's all it took. The building manager, curious and cautious, knocked on Yu's door that afternoon. Yu didn't answer, but the manager thought he heard rustling inside. Something not right. Something off. And so, for the first time in months, someone looked into Yu Young Chul. What they found broke the entire case open. Now, here's the strange fact. Yu didn't have a phone. Not a burner. Not a prepaid. Nothing. He used payphones and borrowed devices from internet cafes. That's why he'd gone undetected for so long. No digital footprint. No texts. No signal tracking. That scream was the first and only real-time trace that ever connected him to the scene. When police finally entered Yu's apartment 3 days later, he was already gone. But what they found? It's the kind of thing that even veteran officers don't forget. There were traces of blood on the wooden floors, bleach in the kitchen sink, chopped up women's clothing in the trash. But the worst part? A long duffel bag in the bathtub. Inside, bones. Not fresh, not full skeletons. Cleaned, bleached, arranged, and taped to the outside of the bag, a post-it note with the numbers 9 and 14, written in red ink. No one has ever confirmed what the numbers meant. Were they dates? Victim numbers? Ritual markings? No one knows. You refuse to explain. Here's where the scholarly debate kicks in. Criminal psychologists split into two camps. Some say Yu was purely pragmatic. He killed for control, money, and resentment. That the scream wasn't just a sound that ruined him, but a symbolic breaking of his illusion, that he could stay silent forever. But others, particularly Jung Eun-ki, a profiler who interviewed him multiple times, argue that Yu's murders were theatrical, symbolic, almost artistic in their detachment. He called his crimes cleansing acts, said he was removing trash from society. So which is it? Cold-blooded logic or narcissistic theater? You decide. Here's what we do know. That scream didn't just alert the neighbors. It haunted Yu. He told one interviewer, open quote, "It stuck in my ear, like a knife. I'd be walking and suddenly hear it again. In the sound of brakes, in the way dogs bark, I couldn't sleep." Close quote. It fractured something in him. His murders became messier, sloppier, more rushed. His last victim, a 25-year-old woman named Park Sun-hee, was killed in an alley, not indoors. Witnesses saw a man fleeing in a yellow raincoat. One described him as shaking, like he was scared. And that's what finally brought Yu to the edge. He wasn't the predator anymore. He was the prey. A full task force was now tracking him. Apartment listings he'd used were flagged. Taxi companies circulated his sketch, and sex workers across Seoul were warned not to accept clients who paid in cash and used payphones. Then, on July 15th, 2004, he made his final mistake. He approached a woman outside a karaoke bar in Jongno. She sensed something was off and told the building owner. The owner, suspicious, called police. Yu tried to run. He didn't get far. He was tackled, handcuffed, silent. The first thing he asked for? A cigarette. The detective who arrested him would later say, open quote, "He looked empty, not angry, not scared, just done." Close quote. So that's how it ended. Not with a plan, not with a shootout, but with a scream and a cigarette. And I think that's what makes this story so chilling. Because we like to imagine monsters as obvious, loud, flashy. But Yu was quiet. He lived among people, fed cats, paid rent, until he didn't. Tonight, if you hear a strange sound outside, maybe just a branch tapping on glass or the fridge making that weird pop, it's probably nothing. Probably. But if you hear a scream, listen. Because someone did once, and it changed everything. Open quote, open quote, open quote. Say continue to begin part 15, the final part. What he said in court. What he said in court. I wish I could tell you Yu Young-chul showed remorse. That after everything, after the screams, the bones, the missing women, he stood up in court, looked at the victims' families and apologized. But that would be a lie. What he said in court was worse than silence. Let me take you there. It's December 13th, 2004. Seoul's Central District Court is packed. Journalists are squeezed shoulder to shoulder in the back rows. Families of the murdered sit on the left side of the aisle, holding framed photos, rosaries, hands. Some have been coming every day since the hearings began. Some, this is their first and last time. Too much pain. Yu walks in wearing a Navy prison uniform and plastic sandals. His hands are cuffed. He's lost weight. His hair is shaved. But his face is calm, unbothered, like he's just here for a parking ticket. The room holds its breath. The prosecution begins by listing the charges. 20 murders, attempted murder, robbery, body mutilation, obstruction of justice. Yu doesn't blink. Then they display the timeline. Elderly couples between September 2003 and March 2004. Sex workers between April and July 2004. Locations, tools, disposal sites. One prosecutor trembles while describing the bathtub scene. One juror wipes her eyes, and the judge pauses briefly, seemingly overwhelmed. Still, Yu says nothing. Finally, they ask him to speak. He stands. No notes, no lawyer prompts. And in the quietest voice, he says, open quote, "Killing is fun." Close quote, gasps. A woman screams and faints. Court officers rush to escort her out. He continues, open quote, I did not kill people. I killed parasites. I cleaned the world. Close quote. Then even more chilling, open quote, I wish I could have killed 100, maybe 1,000. Close quote, it's not just horrifying, it's mocking. Here's the strange fact. During this part of the trial, Yu was smiling, a tiny, barely there grin, almost like he was watching a rerun of his favorite show. Even the judge couldn't hide his discomfort. He asked Yu, do you feel no regret? Yu replied, open quote, only regret is that I was caught. Close quote. No remorse, no apology, not even fake tears. At one point, when a mother of one of the victims demanded to know why he killed her daughter, he turned to her and said, open quote, ask your society. You created me. Close quote. That line shook the court. Because for a split second, it wasn't just madness. It was manipulation. And that brings us to the scholarly debate. Legal scholars and criminologists have long argued over Yu's competency. Was he insane, truly detached from reality? Or just evil, calculating, and aware? A panel of forensic psychologists examined him extensively. Their conclusion? Yu Young-chul had no diagnosed mental illness. He understood right from wrong. He planned, covered his tracks, adjusted behavior to avoid capture. Legally, he was fully competent. But others, like Professor Song Hae-in of Yonsei University, argue that his personality disorders, narcissism, antisocial traits, make the insanity defense a gray zone. After all, can someone that broken ever be truly sane? Still, the court ruled. On December 30th, 2004, Yu Young-chul was sentenced to death. He didn't flinch. In fact, when the sentence was read, he smirked. One reporter caught him mouthing the words, finally. It's worth noting, South Korea hasn't carried out an execution since 1997. Technically, Yu is still alive today, on death row at Seoul Detention Center. His cell is small, no visitors, no television, just 4 gray walls and a steel bed. Occasionally, they say, he writes notes, nonsense phrases, symbols. Once, he reportedly drew diagrams of perfect murder methods on his cell wall using instant coffee. He's still trying to be clever, still trying to be relevant. But outside that cell, the world moved on. The government launched new safety reforms for sex workers and elderly communities. Mental health support programs expanded. And for a brief moment, Seoul stopped pretending that serial killers didn't exist in South Korea. People still whisper about him. At night, on long bus rides through the city, you'll hear stories passed between university students. My cousin used to live near him. Or my aunt saw him once at the market. Urban legend now, but real. And what about justice? That's the hardest part, because no sentence, no matter how final, can bring back the 20 lives you destroyed. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe justice is found in remembering, in telling the story again, so it's never lost. So the warning never fades. So tonight as we end, picture this. A quiet courtroom, a murderer smiling, and across from him 20 empty chairs. Now slowly, one by one, they fill with light. One grandmother, one daughter, one son, one friend. They're not forgotten, not as long as you're still listening. So, now that you've heard everything, I want you to breathe with me. In through the nose and slowly out. Let it all fade, the courtrooms, the crime scenes, the twisted monologues. Let it melt into the shadows where it came from. I'm still here with you, and I want to tell you something softer, something closer to the quiet. There's a kind of hush that comes after stories like this. It isn't peace, not quite. It's more like recognition. A stillness that arrives when we finally admit that darkness doesn't just live in the movies or distant lands. It lives beside us. Sometimes behind the smile of a neighbor, sometimes in the silence of a stranger. But it also means something else. That remembering the victims, holding space for their names, even in the dark, is how we honor them. That when the world feels too loud, too sharp, too unforgiving, there's strength in whispering their stories back into being. If you're lying in bed now, maybe staring at the ceiling or curling your toes under the blanket, know this. You're not alone. You've walked through something heavy, and you're still here, breathing. So give yourself permission to rest, to let your mind drift, to feel the fan hum and the darkness soften into velvet, the kind of quiet that carries no teeth, only sleep. And when dreams come, let them be gentle. Let them wash over you like waves. No killers, no fear, just silence and stars. Because I'll be here again next time with another truth. Until then, open quote, end of script, good night. Close quote, close quote, close quote.